Chess YouTube, welcome back. In today's video, I want to show you one of the best games that Hans Niemann just played versus Daniil Dubov in their rematch of the original one-on-one Blitz match. Now, in the rematch, Hans and Daniil, they played, I believe, 20 Blitz games pretty much back-to-back over the course of 2 days. And Hans, sure enough, he won it at the very end with a score of 10.5 to 9.5 points. Hans Niemann squeaking out the victory. Actually, I believe it was originally tied at 9 points each, and then Hans just barely squeaked it out in the tiebreak. So kudos to Hans, a well-deserved victory. And this game right here, I mean, this game features a ludicrous queen sack basically out of the opening. You don't want to miss this queen sack. I have never seen this idea in this opening, and it really blew my mind when I first saw it. But turns out it's all home preparation by these two super grandmasters. Anyway, in the game, Hans Niemann opening 1e4 in the spirit of his favorite chess player, that being, of course, Bobby Fischer. Now, black here goes c5, the most combative response to 1e4. So which Sicilian line will black go for? In the game, white goes knight f3, intending d4 with the open Sicilian, and Daniil goes d6. All right, we have d4, c takes, knight takes, white going for the open Sicilian, black goes knight f6, challenging the white pawn on e4, white goes knight c3, defending that pawn, and now here Daniil has a few different options. The main moves for black include g6, e6, knight c6, a6, and so on. So which variation will black go for? Well, Daniil is actually a big exponent of the Dragon Sicilian with the move g6, and that is what he goes for in this game. Now, the dragon is not necessarily the most trendy option at the highest level. A lot of black players prefer to avoid this line, as white gets very good play if he goes for essentially the English attack with the moves bishop e3, queen d2, long castles, and so on. This just seems to give white very good play for very little risk. So most black players, they prefer to avoid these fianchetto-based defenses when white can go for this simple attacking setup. But Daniil Dubov, this guy is a fighter. He wants the Dragon Sicilian. He got the dragon. Let's see what happens. All right, from here, both sides develop and castle and play a bunch of logical moves. We have bishop e3, knight c6, f3, bishop g7, queen d2, castles and castles. So both sides so far playing effectively the most standard of standard moves here. Both sides castle, and as you all know, when the kings are castled on opposite sides of the board like this, with the black king on g8 and the white king on c1, basically it's going to be an all-out, not base trade. I'm dating myself. I used to play StarCraft 2. It's basically a StarCraft 2 base trade right here, where both sides are attacking all out on opposite sides of the board. Black here will be attacking all out on the queen side. He will likely launch these pawns forward at some point. Meanwhile, white will attack on the king side with moves like g4, h4, h5, and so on. As Bobby Fischer once said, it's just sack, sack, mate, and you win the game. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that, but that is the basic idea here. So what is black going to do in response? Well, here he plays the main move, and instead of counterattacking on the queen side, he goes d5, trying to open the center right away and therefore avoid white's most dangerous attacking ideas. However, white should be able to get a decent edge here as well. Now, white here has a million options. You can take on d5, you can go queen d1, you can go king b1, you can take on c6, and so on. In the game here, white takes on d5, takes on d5, not sure what happened there. Black takes back with the knight, and then we have knight takes c6, b takes c6, and then bishop d4. So this is one of the strongest, most mainline ways to meet the dragon. White here is trying to trade off these dark squared bishops. If he can do that, that would be a huge, and I mean huge, victory for white. After all, this bishop on g7, it has the critical role of defending all of these weak dark squares on the king side. And if that bishop falls, all of these squares will be that much weaker. And here, black does take on d4. We have bishop takes, then queen takes, then queen to a5. The queen flies out into the game and potentially threatens both c3 and the a2 squares. For example, now, black could be threatening knight takes, then queen takes a2, winning a pawn, or queen takes c3, trying to damage white's pawn structure after queen takes, then b takes. So black here has some pretty concrete threats, and what will Hans Niemann do in response? Well, he's going to capture on d5 like this. Knight takes d5, we have c takes d5, and now here, of course, this pawn on d5, it can be taken. And Hans, he captures it. Queen takes. So what is the idea of Daniil Dubov? I mean, Daniil Dubov, he was sort of like aiming for this position as black. He kind of knew this would happen. He almost wanted it to happen. So why did Daniil willingly go for a scenario where he's just down a pawn like this? Well, part of the idea is black here, he has these open lines of attack against the white king on the b file and the c file. And especially in a blitz game, in Blitz, the initiative and attacking at all costs is so important. So black here should be able to drum up some attacking chances against the white king. All right, here, Daniil. Queen to c7 is the move. He drops back and potentially sets up the idea of bishop to f5, targeting c2. And beyond that, ideas like rook d8 could also come into play later as well. All right, Hans. Queen to c4. The queen drops back, and he offers the queen trade. But will Daniil go for it? Will he trade queens, or will he do something else? Well, in the game, Daniil goes queen to a5. He flies out with the queen. Then we have queen d5, once again offering the queen trade. And again, if these queens come off the board, the attack will come to a screeching halt, and therefore, black will be just down a pawn for nothing, and Hans will likely win the game in short order. So here, Daniil, he has to go back. Queen to c7 is the move. And here, Hans Niemann says, wait a minute. All right, I can go back to c4, but then you go here to a5, and we're just dancing back and forth. On the other hand, wait a minute. What about the rook on a8? Can I just take the rook? Can I just take the rook on the a8 square? Hans Niemann, I assume he calculates everything out in advance, and he takes the rook on the a8 square. And this leads to massive complications. I'm talking about massive complications here. Black, he plays the only move, bishop to f5, with the double attack on c2 threatening checkmate and the queen on the a8 square. Hans Niemann, how do you defend against both of these threats? Well, technically, you can go back to e4, blocking the attack, but then you lose the queen for almost nothing. So Hans Niemann, what do you do here as white? How do you defend against both of these threats? What is the best solution? Well, Hans Niemann, he finds the right idea, and if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for white in this scenario. And this is a beautiful, beautiful idea. Hans Niemann, he gives up the queen. Queen takes f8 is the brilliant showstopper move. And what is the idea? It's simple. He already won the rook on the a8 square. Now he wins the other rook with check against the king. So queen takes, king takes, and then bishop d3 blocks the attack of the bishop. And here, Hans Niemann, he has a pawn and two rooks versus the queen. And that means technically he's up 2 pawns in the middle game, end game scenario, and he has a massive advantage. So Daniil, can this guy even hang on against a raging Hans Niemann right there? This guy is playing just some really, really precise chess so far. All right, Daniil, queen to f4, hits the king on the c1 square. Now, the king slides over, king to b1. Hans getting out of the way of the attack. Now, Daniil, bishop e6. He retreats and increases the tension on the pawn on a2, and of course, avoids the bishop trade. Black here has to keep as many pieces on the board as possible. If that bishop falls, then it's going to be so much harder to get the attack going against the white king on b1. And that, of course, is the entire idea of what black is striving for here. He has to attack at all costs. All right, white, h3 is the move. Defending h2 in advance. Therefore, now he can go rook h to e1 and maybe even rook to e4 without worrying about losing the pawn on the h2 square. Very, very good move. Now, black, queen g5 is the idea, targeting g2 right here. Now we have rook hg1 and then h5, gaining space on the king side. Now here, Hans, c4 is the move, gaining space on the queen side, and black here goes h4, the alpha 0 pawn, clamping down on the g3 square. I mean, at the GM level these days, this is about the only thing grandmasters know how to do is push their alpha 0 h pawns down the board. Now white here, rook c1, getting behind the pass pawn on c4. Hans Niemann, he studied Nimzovich, he studied my system. He knows pass pawns must be pushed and rooks belong behind the pass pawns. Very good stuff. All right, Daniil here. What do you do as black? Well, he has to find some way to increase the tension on the king on b1. He has to find some way to attack, some way to create more threats. But the problem is, how do you do that? The queen and the bishop, these two pieces alone, there's only so much they can attack. Yes, the queen can go to, say, c4, or sorry, f4, trying to pressure c4, but then white just goes c5, and the pawn marches down the board, and there's not much black can do. So what does Daniil Dubov do? Well, as they say, when in doubt, you push the alpha 0 pawn. a5 is the move. Daniil Dubov, U-Dog, intending a4 and then a3, gaining space on the queen side, continuing the attack. A very, very strong idea, and effectively the only way to create practical problems against the opponent. All right, Hans, king to a1. The king slides over, and then sure enough, a4 is the move, gaining even more space on the queen side. Absolutely brilliant stuff. All right, now we have a3, stopping the pawn, and then queen to c5. The queen slides over and maintains some pressure on, for example, the rook on the g1 square. Now here, Hans, rook gd1 is the move. Hans Niemann, not messing around, gets the rook out of the way of the attack by the queen, even though it was defended, and now these two rooks on c1 and d1 are perfectly placed. All right, Daniil, king g7, getting his king off the back rank right here. Then we have the move bishop e4, and then here, the key idea for black is going to be f5, gaining space and driving back that bishop. But instead here, king to f6 is the move. And this is the start of a very, very weird idea by Daniil. I mean, the king on f6 is just making itself more and more exposed. All right, white, a rook to c3 is the move. Then g5, rook d2, king to e5. Daniil Dubov, he honestly believes the king on the e5 square is not only safe, it is an attacking piece and an asset in the position. All right, let's see how it works out. Here, Hans, bishop d5 is the move, offering the trade of bishops. Here, Daniil, he avoids it. Bishop f5, bishop e4, bishop e6, and then king to b1. Hans Niemann, he doesn't really have a plan yet. He's sort of sharking around, trying to find an opening. And as we're going to see, here, Hans kind of going back and forth with his pieces. He's not really able to find a good way to attack. Now here, if he goes king g1, queen to g1 would be a draw on the spot. So to maintain the tension, to keep the game going, Hans Niemann, the move is bishop to d1, blocking any kind of attack on the first rank to the king from queen g1. Now here, Daniil, king g3 is the move. The king marching all the way from g8 all the way up, all the way down to the g3 square. Daniil, U-Dog, completing the king march in this game. What a weird looking idea, but somehow the king is safe on g3, at least for now. All right, Hans Niemann, king b1, bishop f5, hits the king c1, and then bishop d7. This turns out to be a slightly dubious idea, and Hans, he finds the right idea right away. That is the move f4 with the attack on the king on the g3 square. Now, the only legal moves for black are going to be, well, besides sacking the queen, the only good legal moves include king takes f4 and king to h2. Now here, the king takes on f4, but here Hans, rook d5. He cuts off the king on the 5th rank, and the black king is now stranded on f4. All right, g4 is the move. We have c5. The passed pawn is being pushed down the board. e5, and then c6. Hans Niemann, he is not slowing down. The bishop goes forward to e6, but here Hans, c7 is the move. The rook sack. The point being, if you take the rook, then c8 promotes to a queen, and that would be all she wrote. So Daniil Dubov, he's got to find a different solution. He takes on h3. Hans Niemann, he takes back on h3 as well. Very importantly, if you don't take on h3, if you go c8, promoting to a queen, then black here takes on c8, and if white takes back, then bang, h takes g2 is a nightmare for white, as black would have those two passed pawns on g2 and h4. That would be no bueno, mi amigo. All right, here, g takes h3 is the move for white. Then queen to b7 is the move, pressuring the rook on the d5 square. Of course, if black takes the rook, then bang, c8 promotes to a queen, and white wins the game. So you can't allow that. Queen b7, rook d8. White here defending c8, trying to force through the advance of the pawn. What is black going to do? We have the move e4, then bishop g4. Hans Niemann finding every little last resource to try and remove the defender of the c8 square, that being the bishop on the e6 square. Now, We have f5 blocking the attack. And here, white has at least a couple of very, very strong moves to maintain the attack. Those moves include rook to e8, pressuring the bishop, and bishop e2, retreating back with the bishop. Instead, rook to f8 played in the game, and this turns out to be a little bit weaker if black finds the key idea of e3, trying to push his passed pawn down the board and then go queen to g2, with the pawn being somewhat escorted by the queen. That would be very, very strong here. Now, instead, in the game, Daniil Dubov, king g5 is the move. The king goes up, and this is a massive mistake. That deserves 3 question marks here, because Hans Niemann, he finds the finishing blow. You take on f5, black takes back, and then bada boom, bada bang, rook takes f5. The point being here in this scenario, if you take the rook on f5 like this, then of course you just go c8, promoting to a queen, black takes, white takes, and white is going to win this endgame easy peasy lemon squeezy. So for that reason, in this position, right here, Daniil Dubov is forced to resign to Hans Niemann. What a game between these two players. I mean, you couldn't ask for 2 more evenly matched players in Blitz. And keep in mind, Daniil Dubov is a top 5 Blitz player. He's rated very, very high in Blitz. So Hans Niemann going toe-to-toe with effectively a top 5 Blitz player. Very impressive stuff. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, comment down below. What did you think of Hans Niemann and the queen sack 18, queen takes f8. This move right here absolutely shocked me. I'm very curious what you guys think of it. It looks to be actually, surprisingly, an opening move. Like, this appears to be opening theory, where Hans Niemann, he likely didn't have to figure it out over the board. He likely knew in advance this had to be good for white. So a really shocking idea that I was not familiar with out of the opening. But very cool stuff. All right, yeah, comment down below what you think of this move right here, and feel free to smash that like button. It does help me out a ton if you do that. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond, and I'll see you in the next video.